Are millennial men a hopeless generation of lazy, emasculated ne'er-do-wells living the stereotypical life in the basement, playing video games, and having to be hounded into their responsibilities? One of my viewers seems to think so. His comment and my reaction coming up on An Ear for Men. Hi everyone, Paul here. Welcome back. I did a recent video on men and man caves that touched on men's responsibilities to their relationships versus their responsibilities to their own interests. It was a response to an article on a Christian website admonishing men to be careful with man caves because they might lead them to neglect their families. One viewer thought that video was missing something really big: millennial men. Rather than paraphrase or speak for him, I'm going to quote his entire comment. It was a thoughtful statement and deserves to be heard entirely and in context. This comes from Noah Larson. I will use inflection where he used the caps lock and will hopefully do him justice with this reading. All right, Paul, he says, I've been listening for a while now and I love your videos, but I think you're missing something. You're addressing men here, but not the men of the millennial generation, the generation that I found out the other day outnumbers everyone else in the country, God help us all. We've been brought up on Google, free internet porn, and Xbox. I know a lot of men who will or would, if their wifey or girlfriend would let them, disappear into their man cave and spend the entire evening there screwing off on the Xbox or computer or whatever, basically wasting their time on stupid, trivial crap that doesn't matter at all in the grand scheme of things. They aren't men at all. They're just boys whose body outgrew their brain. I know there is a drought of real men in our generation, and perhaps, just perhaps, these are the men this joker is writing to. Most of these idiots actually do need to be told to get off their ass and, well, hell, do something. It's not even just the fat, out-of-shape pieces of shit you're used to looking at and automatically figuring out that they're lazy pieces of shit. It can also be those who work hard and do a great job at work that then go home and veg out doing nothing at all. Their women complain that they're lazy and they don't help out around the house. And sometimes, to be fair, the women are right. Their women really do have to treat them like a child and tell them it's time to get a move on. You'll be late for work. Or put the Xbox away and come to bed. It's 2 a.m. I've known a lot of man-children like this, he continues. The women have had to assert themselves to have any kind of order and structure in the house. They've no sense of responsibility or duty to care for their house, car, yard, hell, even their wife or kids. A father does have a responsibility to teach his son how to be a man and to teach his daughters how a man should treat them. I think one of the fundamental flaws in our whole generation is our fathers tried to teach us how to be men, and our fathers did because they were men. But we just blew it off and set out to do our own thing. The allure of video games, instant gratification, and technology coupled with the sex sells bullshit is just too strong for these weak-minded milksops. That's why all things like this BS product plus zero effort equals results sells like hotcakes to these morons. Finally, Noah says, so I definitely appreciate what you're saying to those of us who are true men. Though I'm not at all saying that's your fault, just like with anything, you're going to have those dirtbags out there who take what you're saying and just run with it. Paul says I don't have to help you do anything, when that's not what you're saying at all. You're telling men to be men, not telling a man-child to continue being a man-child. You're reckoning us back to a day when, as Archie Bunker so eloquently put it, girls were girls and men were men. And I could not possibly agree more. End of quote. First, thank you, Noah, for your thoughtful comment. I've given it quite a bit of thought and I decided to respond. Let me start that by first saying, welcome, Noah, to the fatherless generations. We are now well into our second generation of men raised in a society where masculine influence in the lives of boys has been all but eliminated. From stripping dads from the home to demeaning all things masculine and ignoring the critical importance of fathers, we have set up young men to present exactly how you have described them in your comment. Let's consider how you describe their relationships with their wives and girlfriends, how they would draw into media and other asocial activities and only attend to the needs of others when harangued into it by their women. That precisely describes countless teenage boys in the homes of single mothers who ditch the father, alienate him from the home, and rob the son of the father's disciplining influence. Exceptions aside, Noah, fathers discipline and mothers nag. Where are these millions of boys supposed to go to for guidance? Their experience, if we're going to be fair to them, is that of a suddenly disappearing dad and then formative years spent hearing the father being berated and even hearing the mother say, "You're just like your dad." That would be the same dad that she has spent 10 years describing as a useless piece of shit who never cared about anyone but himself. The thing is, guidance, discipline, and mentorship is not something that most children seek out. It has to be brought to them. Most single mothers aren't capable of delivering. Their common MO is to get compliance through emotional and psychological bullying. That is a perfect formula to create a 21-year-old who just doesn't give a fuck about anyone else and ultimately about himself. And it is not shocking at all to see the same attitude even in young men whose fathers manage to stay in the home. Peer influence is a powerful force in young people, and a huge percentage of young male peers are fatherless and being raised by shallow, self-indulgent women who put absolutely nothing before their petty desires, including the welfare and future of their offspring. Indeed, from my perspective, I'm thankful that these young men are escaping into media and video games instead of into weaponry and retaliation. The Great Fatherless Society is one of the darkest chapters in our history, and its damage is buried underneath the weight of a massive consumer culture, political correctness, and our sadly human tendency to recriminate more than we seek to understand. And that brings me to another point in this. Noah said in his comment, and I'm paraphrasing him here, that I was talking to real men in these videos, not the overgrown boys of the millennial generation, implying my message was lost on them. And he's partially right on one count. I am always pleasantly surprised to get a supportive email or a Patreon subscriber from the millennial generation. Truth tell, I would not blame a single one of them if they would not give me the time of day. Why? Because of all the supposedly real men who let this happen. Where were those real men when all this started happening in the 1960s and 70s? How many countless hundreds of thousands of supposedly real men folded like cheap suits when feminist influence and political correctness contaminated our schools, churches, courts, and governance? How many real men staged protests, organized opposition, or voted people out of office in order to protect the futures of their sons? How many of the real men showed up at PTA meetings and told teachers they did not want their sons to be treated like second-class citizens? How many of them are doing it now? How many fathers right now have banded together out of concern about what is happening to the young men who are disappearing from our college campuses? How many of them are drawing lines in the sand in their own homes saying they won't have their son attend a college that treats them like a potential rapist? If we're going to be critical of millennials for doing nothing, let's at least be as critical of others for the same and recognize that the same generations of men that cured polio, landed on the moon, and invented the internet were impotent and silent in the face of all this nastiness that harmed our boys. I'm sorry. If I'm going to define real manhood by courage and action, I'm not going to bestow that honor on men who would allow harm to their sons and brothers because they were too afraid of the disapproval of women. No way. No, Noah, and I mean this with all respect, the problem is not the millennial generation. It is the millennial generation that is now paying the price for the cowardice of the supposedly real men who came before them, and for the selfishness and neglect of their mothers. In terms of solutions, I have to admit I'm short on having a grand plan. I don't see how we get out of this mess. But I'm pretty sure it is not by sending these young men the same message that their mothers did, and it is not by standing idly by as their lives atrophy. For that part, my conscience is clear. In fact, doing something about this, at least as much as one poor man can do, is what my life is about. And I'm glad to say that there are others doing the same thing. My work is designed to inspire men to rethink themselves, and in doing that, to look far past the surface. It's easy and obvious to conclude that a young man needs more than video games and tech gadgets to have a fulfilling life. It is a lot more important to understand they were ushered into that place in life by weak and selfish parents. Feel free to attach the appropriate adjective to the corresponding parent. Society has pretty much destroyed the kind of family that would have helped these young men. In my opinion, it is up to us to provide them an alternative. I know YouTube channels, blogs, and even social movements like we are seeing in men right now are goddamn rotten and laughable substitutes for fathers and families. But at the moment, that is what we have. As they say, you go to war with the army you have, not the one you want. And that is it for another Talk at an Ear for Men. As always, I hope you've enjoyed, even if you haven't, and see you next time.